as you can see, the video that National CASA GAL produced shows some things that are really good about how she got on the same level and introduced herself and different things like that. But there's always room for you to do it a little differently, which is why we asked the question above. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that initial contact, that initial visit. There are a few things that you do need to do at that visit. Number one, regardless of the age of the child, if they're old enough to have a conversation and things like that, and with any and all adults, you do need to have a conversation about confidentiality. So I alluded to this in previous confidentiality training. However, let's go over it again. You can share information with those that are involved in the case. These are the professionals in the court, the attorneys, mom's attorney, dad's attorney, the guardian ad litem, the caseworker, and any other agency worker that is assigned to that case. You can also share that information with appropriate CASA staff. Now, outside of that, you can't share information. Like you saw in that video, she could not tell placement about how mom was doing and if mom was going to treatment or anything like that. All she did is she redirected it and said, that's something you need to talk to the caseworker about, which was perfect. So you want to make sure you understand, but how do you do that? Well, I've talked before about Spitfire. She was my 7-year-old, and how I explained it to her on an age-appropriate level was I talked about the judge and I were share buddies. And so there were other adults on the case too, but basically I would share the information I got with the judge. We were share buddies. That is something that was happening in her 2nd grade classroom or 3rd grade classroom, and it was perfect. She understood. I said, like, and with the share buddy, you don't share it with anybody else, but if you want to share something with me, I share it with the judge. That's what I'm doing. She got it. She understood that anything she told me, I would tell the judge. Now, when you get to teenager, a lot of times people don't want to say anything, and especially when you consider our dilemma, you know, did you tell that mom was pregnant again, or did you not, and that sort of thing. And sometimes we're asked to keep information confidential by a mom or a dad or someone else involved in the case, or even maybe a teen or a preteen involved in the case. And then what you need to do, and what our program attorneys will tell us to do, is explain to them, remember, if it's going to be something that's going to impact the case, I need to keep that, you know, that's something I need to be able to share. However, if it is something simple like, I really like this boy or I really like this girl, and they want to keep that a secret unless it has an impact on the case for whatever reason, that's fine. You don't have to share that information. If you wanted to give an update and there is starting to notice boys or girls and is starting to have a crush, and maybe that has impact on the case in that, you know, the child has a crush on someone else in their class, and so their grades have slipped a little bit, but we've had a conversation about that, and you can put that in their update. So you're not breaking the confidentiality of who it is, but it does affect the case in such a way that you would want to bring that up if it's affecting them academically. So you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about here. Another thing you want to do at the very first visit, this is not with the children, but with whoever is placement for the children. If the children have been adjudicated to be a child in need of care, okay, then they have been technically qualified as a victim according to how statutes run in the state of Kansas, which means anything that is not covered under DCF custody, they could potentially get a crime victim's compensation for. Now, so there is a brochure that tells them all about it. Well, obviously I'm not going to hand that brochure to the child, but I would hand that to whoever is in charge of the child, the foster parent, if they're with a kinship placement, even if they're with the parents. So an incident might have happened with one parent and now they're placed with another parent. That's the case. So when would this be used. Unfortunately, I notice I have a case for almost everything, but I guess that's a good thing because you know you're getting valuable knowledge that will be useful. So we had 2 half-sisters in a case of sexual abuse. One of them remained in Kansas and was placed in DCF custody and was placed with kinship placement. Therefore, all the therapies for the sexual abuse, etc., were handled by DCF and their contract agency for us, which is St. Francis. However, the other child had a father who had partial custody. They had a shared custody, and the child was 17, and they want to put the child with a biological parent if at all possible. Well, what they realized is that this child's father works for the equivalent of DCF in another state. So background checks were able to come back really, really quick, and the ICPC process was like next to nothing. And so that child was released from DCF custody and released to the father's custody, where it was taken up by a domestic case. So they altered the custody agreement. The judge altered the custody agreement between the 2 parents. Therefore, that older child was released from DCF custody. What does that mean? Well, that means DCF in the state of Kansas was not paying for any therapies that this child needed to deal with the sexual abuse. However, because she was very fortunate in having a good father, what ended up happening is we had a volunteer that had talked to him when he took custody of his child and said, hey, here's a booklet or here's a pamphlet on crime victims' rights compensation. And we went over what it was, and there's a checklist, and basically it says that you could apply for compensation, and it is not an obscenely large amount of money. It will pay for some therapy sessions. Sometimes it pays for other things in other types of criminal victim cases. But for us, in this instant, it would pay for the therapy that her dad couldn't do yet, because you know when your child changes, all the insurance stuff comes and different things like that. But she was a victim in the state of Kansas, and so they applied for this. They needed help. If you need help, if they want help, you can always help them fill out the form, or you can come to staff. We get trained on it every year, and we can help them fill out and submit the form if they want, or they could do it on their own. Either way, we are just obligated at that first visit to hand it to that person who is at that point in charge of the child or has custody of the child. They need to sign a piece of paper that says, yes, I did receive this for grant purposes for our program and others. And so that money was then used for therapy for the child. Okay. Then I talked about notes, and we've also talked earlier about confidential materials. Those notes are considered confidential, so you do want to be mindful of that. And so I always tell them at this initial visit, I'm going to take notes. Here are some questions that I'm going to ask every time. I don't want to misquote you, and I kind of went into this a little bit earlier anyway in a previous training. So those are things that I want to make sure. We do have a checklist so that you make sure of everything for that first visit. However, we do want to make sure that during that initial contact, we're hitting these points, especially about the confidentiality. This is why it's so crucial at that first visit to go over what you can tell and who you can tell. And what you can tell your parents is outside of the attorneys, everything can potentially, if it affects the case, it will go in my report. My report goes to the CASA staff, it goes to the caseworker, it goes to all the attorneys involved in the case, and it goes to the judge. That's it. It doesn't go to the school, it doesn't go to the neighbors, even if you're interviewing them for other reasons. For instance, I might go to the school and say, how are they doing with grades? Or I might go to the guidance counselor at the school, especially if it's an elementary school where it's a little smaller, and I might say, hey, how are they doing? Do they seem to be making friends? Are they adjusting okay? Are they having any issues? Are you noticing any behaviors in school? And they might say, oh, well, no, we have, or yes, we haven't. Yes, we have, no, we haven't. They might want to ask, well, are they in therapy, or is this happening, or is that happening? And that's where you're going to have to say, you know, those are really great questions, but just like they did in that CASA video, that is something that is information you have to get from the caseworker, because the caseworker is the only one who can release that information, because according to our confidentiality tree, if you'll remember that, they are not one of the people that we can share information with. All right. So that being said, I am now going to have you move on to the next one.